And one of the things I always tell staff is I'm not white knuckled in my job. I love my job, but I love it when my staff does great and I can celebrate them and they do well. They're never going to outshine me. I'm never worried about that. I'm always going to support them and develop them of what they want to do, but they never have to worry about me. I'm very confident in what my background is, and I want really smart people to work with, and I want them to do well and help us and move us forward.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart and Hustle podcast. Now, I'm incredibly excited because I've got the CEO of the IECA here, Samantha Roe. Welcome to the show, Samantha. I'm excited for you to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate your invitation.
Absolutely. So, to kind of talk about the amazing work that you do when it comes to erosion control, but everything else that you kind of have purview over, I want to talk about kind of the importance of erosion control in today's conversation. I want to talk about the business case for erosion control, the impact that we're seeing, what it seems like every single day in our communities. But before we kind of dive into that, how does one become the CEO of this amazing organization? What is kind of your journey like? Let's get a little bit of background in your professional career.
Sure. Well, my journey is not the normal journey, but I think for most association CEOs, they'll tell you that everyone's journey is different. I grew up in Michigan, and I didn't come from a wealthy family, but I really wanted to do more and get out of Michigan and learn other languages and study abroad and kind of see the world. So I really focused on that when I was younger. I went to Western Michigan University. I studied French and Asian studies with business and European studies, and was able to find work study programs in other countries. So I was able to live in Japan, France, Ireland, and Quebec, Canada. And so that gave me a really great background and a double bachelor's degree. And then I moved to South Florida, which didn't do me as well. But I made the course correction and moved to DC, and ended up initially working for American University. I wanted to be a foreign service officer. But as I talked to some of the foreign service officers, I said, don't do it. So I did what most people do when they go to DC, is they go and work on Capitol Hill to get the experience. It would be kind of the equivalent of moving to Hollywood and never working in the industry if you didn't have that. It really kind of cripples you. So I worked for a congressman for a couple of years from California, and that was really fantastic, great exposure. And then I went to work for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And while I was at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they have a program called the Institute for Organization Management. And so I actually worked on that program for a while, but then I also participated in it. And so it gave me the background. It's basically a training program for chamber executives and association executives to help run those areas. So most people don't necessarily go, there are more programs now, but most people don't go to school for association management. They don't realize that that's what they're going to get into. So it was a really great opportunity. While I was at the chamber, I also worked as the director of the chairman's program. So I was able to travel with the chairman of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for 2 years. 1 year it was with a CEO of a large business, and the following year it was one with a smaller business. So it worked out really great. I went to the G8 Business Summit in Tokyo by chance, which was great because, when I graduated with French and Asian Studies, everyone told me I would never be able to use it and have that opportunity. And then we also went to the Emergency G5 Summit in Paris during the financial meltdown. So that was a really great experience. But when you're in DC, you realize that if you're going to stay and if you're going to be a lobbyist, you're kind of tied into DC forever. And I knew I wanted to go and have that experience, but I was ready for a change of lifestyle. So I moved to Colorado in 2010 and started working for an association, the Financial Planning Association. And I was there with chapter and volunteer relations. So I got to very comfortable understanding kind of what was going on and the value of associations when it comes down to components. since. And then I went to the Society for Mining, Metallurgy, and Exploration after that and did membership. And then a recruiter found me, and it was a very auspicious time. And so I started actually October 1st was my 6-year anniversary with IECA.
Wow. 6 years now. Seems like time has flown. So
I
here's
know.
one of my questions for you is being born or growing up in Michigan, right, and spending time there. So many people want to get out of that state and go explore the world. What was your biggest motivation for getting outside of the mitten, if you will? Because I also grew up there. I was always encouraged to go out and experience different types of cultures and different types of people. What was your biggest motivation for getting out of the glove, I guess you would say, and going to DC and France and all these other places?
So I was kind of a lonely child and a dreamer, and I just always wanted to do more. And actually, my French teacher in college asked me, like, why did I want to do these things, and what was it? Because I didn't come from a family that was really important to. Not they weren't really promoting it. But they weren't discouraging it as much. But it was more something that was very much I was driving, and I was always friends with the exchange students and all those people. When wherever I went to school, I would always like gravitate toward those people who were different and interesting and wanted to learn more and really enjoyed it. And so it was funny because I moved so much because I was a year in France, a year in Japan, 4 months in Ireland, 3 months in Quebec, and my parents finally said, okay, why don't you just be like stable for 2 years? And so I ended up staying in DC for 10 years, and it worked out really great. But I just always, I wanted something different. And with Michigan, I really appreciate having grown up there. But, for me, I looked at the economy, and at that time, the big three automakers really had a stranglehold on the state. And so no matter what you went into, if you went into nursing, you were still probably going into nursing to be near either a plant or whatever. And my grandma actually worked for Oldsmobile on the line. And so I grew up in a family that was very familiar with the automakers and everything else, but I knew I didn't want to be connected to that. And I was really fortunate because, well, we didn't have money, we had exposure. And so my dad was in politics and would have fundraisers and do things. I traveled with the circus for a while when I was younger, things like that, I think, not a very unique childhood compared to others, but it just gave me that view of more, and just helped me to want to keep striving to try new things. And when I get bored, and I'm also late diagnosed ADHD, which now describes a lot of my childhood of why. So it is definitely something that has worked in my favor from that perspective. So.
What is the process of becoming, I would say, assimilated and integrated into the process of living in a state or a place like DC? Now, recognize tons of tradition there, tons of circles. So if you come in from the outside, you're gonna have to be really assertive and kind of implementing yourself into those social circles, getting exposure. What was that process like of making that adjustment and living in DC for so long?
It does. It's really interesting. By chance, my brother, he worked in DC at a point. When I moved to DC, he was back in California, but then he ended up coming in. And so at the time that I got the job with the congressman, they knew who I was because of connection to my brother, but they actually never talked to him. And there's another person we had in common that was the person who was basically told them that I was a good person and could be trusted, and could bring me into the fold for it. I think it's one of those things that you do have to just get in there and make those moves, create those friendships, things like that. What I like about working on the Hill is that it's kind of college again, in the fact that you have a lot of younger people. Each office is a little different because they're from a different state, a different group, but you ended up meeting them. This was back in the early 2000s, so it was great because we would meet at receptions, things like that. And as I mentioned before, you really, if you go to DC, have to have that experience so that you can go work in other areas, because you really can't understand it unless you've lived it. And so it was a great opportunity. I did it for 2 years, but you're kind of on 24/7. So 2 years is like 4 years.
Yeah.
But it was a great time, and it helped me get to the U.S. Chamber, which then led to other things as well.
So 2010, we now move to Colorado and we start, managing and helping with these associations. Why are associations something that kind of like got your attention? I'm really interested in kind of how you navigated this early chapter, because association management and helping associations is not something that often we hear about, even here on the podcast. So what were some of the decisions that were aligned with moving to Colorado, now getting integrated into the association space? What was that like?
So the U.S. Chamber actually had the Chamber of Commerce Committee of 100, which is the top 100 chamber executives in the country. And I worked closely with them, both with the Institute program and with the programming with the Committee of 100 and CCC 100. So they had also the top 100 association executives. So I was able to meet them, talk to them, talk about their industries. I was really fortunate with my mentor, who was my boss, who, when we were talking about like, when I leave the chamber, what do I want to do? And I said, I can't get excited about a product. I can't go work for Sprint. I can say Sprint since it's not really there anymore. I can't really get into that, but I really love to connect people, and I like to do something that is helping the world. And, I feel like half of my job is kind of my volunteer work as well. I could be making more money doing something else, but I believe in what we're doing, and there's so much opportunity, and really looking forward to seeing the impact we can have.
I mean, it's amazing to think about how there are these organizations and associations that have such a huge impact in our communities, but you guys kind of operate in the shadows, right? And which is really, really interesting to me. So let's kind of get into the importance of erosion control. What is erosion control? How does it impact everybody as we kind of sit here today on this call who was listening and tuning in? Kind of paint the picture for us so we can have the understanding of the audience here.
Sure. Well, I always say, when I tell people what I do, I usually get a blank stare, and they say, that sounds important, but I have no idea what that is. And, it's something that is, I think, very fundamental to our lives that we take for granted. And it's now something that has been brought to the forefront because of different storm events, things that are happening. So erosion control is even when you have a single family house, when your yard, for people in their yard, and they maybe have some sort of slope and it's not stabilized, you understand. So it's one of those things, it when it's bad because you're, trying to deal with it and trying to fix it. But basically it's the erosion control, the sediment. So sediment in streams, lakes and streams, things like that, where you see these things and it's very foggy. They shouldn't be foggy. And so figuring out what the sediment is and how to reduce it. We like to say we keep soils where soils should be and water where water should be. And we just try to do what we can to preserve the earth and for future generations. And so what I really like about this organization and the industry is that it truly is doing something that's trying to make it better for the future, and also help you individually and personally as well with your personal investments, things from single family homes, multi-family homes, things like that. It all matters when it comes down to it.
I mean, the thing that I think is really important for us to emphasize is you never think about erosion control until you need erosion control. And when you need erosion control, it's too late to have the conversation. And over the last couple months here, right, we're recording this at the beginning of December 2024. We've seen some really bad hurricanes that have impacted Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina. And one of the examples that I think is important for us to talk about is kind of Asheville, right? We saw Asheville, major flooding, 2,000 feet above sea level. Why is it now important for people to recognize the impact of erosion, especially when it comes to impact our finances? Is there a connection there that makes your guys' role, responsibility, and the impact that you guys are trying to make more impactful?
Sure. So it's actually twofold. One, you have new construction and higher density construction. So as rain events happen, they go in, and because they don't have permeable ways to go into the earth, then what do? They stay on top and they flood. The other part is the aging infrastructure. And this is very apparent. Well, we're talking about Asheville. If we go back to Detroit, every time it rains in Detroit, there's major flooding. People are losing cars. All these things are happening, and it has a huge impact on it. So you go back to Asheville. One of the things with IECA, we have 9 chapters in the US, and they're all based off of EPA region. And the reason is because the geography and topography of these EPA regions is different. So when you are doing things in Florida, the rain events, things that happen, are much different than when you're in high desert in Colorado. And so it's important that you're working with your area, the geography, topography, in doing the things that you need to do. What happened with Asheville being as high as it was, from sea level, and having such an impact, that was definitely I can't even say once in 500 year. I mean, that was just a really, truly interesting event that happened. But that's why it's really difficult, and we need to be able to work with what the current situation is, but also what could potentially happen. And that's where it goes back to that high density building. When I moved here in 2010, it's 2024. It has grown so much in this area. And so what's happened with that? So there are less areas for the water to penetrate into, things like that. So we get those rain events, and they're going to be standing, they're going to be doing, they're not going to do what they did before. And so it's really important, as you're doing this, to keep from flooding in your, basements and things like that. One of the things that happened with the hurricanes in Florida that was really interesting is that I heard a lot of backlash about flood zones and people, flood insurance and things like that. In Florida, if you do not live in a floodplain, you cannot get flood insurance. And even if you can, good luck. So you really do have to feel for people. Florida is kind of a marshy swamp, and, they've been doing that. But I think that that's where, innovation in building and how they're doing that to sustain, there are some easy fixes that can happen from it. So,
I mean, I think about, especially over the last couple of years, because of the pandemic, right? We saw mass populations in heavily, I would say, congested metropolitan areas move outward to different areas in different states. Las Vegas, we got a ton of people from Colorado. We got a ton of people from California. And it seems like we continue to grow outward without the plan of flooding. I talk about this. When I first moved to Vegas in 2012, we had, I want to say, probably like 6 inches of rain over like maybe an 8-hour span. A ton of rain here in Southern Nevada. Everything flooded out really bad. We always talked about it. But in the recent years, ever since we've seen more population, more asphalt, the flooding here in Las Vegas has gotten so much worse because all of the water that falls up on the mountains goes directly down into the valley. And it seems like there's a lack of planning that comes along with that, because the flooding here is no joke. We're talking like 3 feet of water that will rush down through Las Vegas Boulevard into some areas like the Link and the Strip. Are we being a little bit impatient with growth and not, I would say, building the infrastructure that's needed to stop some of these huge flooding events?
Sure.
Seems like we continue to see these more and more often.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to, it's kind of like pre 9/11. We didn't think that having security at the airport was important. In fact, I remember thinking before, we're a little wild and loose with, security, where you could just walk right up, get on a plane, and there wasn't anything. And I think what happened is people just, they think Las Vegas or California, and they think dry. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, it is. And the same with Colorado, it can be dry. But then you get a rain event, and that changes everything. And so you have to still build to worst case scenarios, because all it takes is one to wipe out that investment, whether it's, a single family home or even some of the commercial things. One thing I will say is that, a builder goes in and they're trying to maximize their profit. So they're going to go in and they're going to build what they think, with all the different, HGTV has put it out there, all the different things you want to have and all these things. Well, all these things cost money. And so sometimes what happens is the landscaping and those pieces that you think, oh, that's just more for, it to be pretty or aesthetic or whatever. It also is a function of, again, when you get rain, when you get snow events as well. We had a huge snow event here, and it's just important that you're looking at it more holistically.
How are we supposed to balance the holistic approach to building the infrastructure needed for sustainability? On the opposite side, we have, I need to make these things, these environments, these infrastructures as cheap as possible to be able to save money. Where's the balancing point there? And what role do you guys play in saying, hey, more sustainability means more intention, means more money to be able to build out these new living spaces, XYZ? How do you guys kind of balance that responsibility?
So, as we've seen over the past, 10, 15 years, the increase in pricing for homes, both single family and multi-unit, have skyrocketed. But one of the things, it can be a sales tool. So, for instance, in Alabama, in some of the new build homes, they're actually building stormwater retention tanks, and it's a selling point. So, if you can turn it just from, hey, we did it and it's kind of hidden, and you're bringing it up more to, it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. And by the way, you have the stormwater retention tank that then is going to recycle that water into water for your sprinklers. Then that becomes part of it, and it becomes part of that circle of life for it. And that's where I really try to focus on the business case for it, because these insurance companies are pulling out of California and Florida, and it's a business case for them. They can't sustain these losses. But with living in Colorado, I've been here 14 years, and I've had two new $40,000, $50,000 roofs on my house because we're in Hale Alley. So at a certain point, they're going to say, we're not going to replace your roof. They've already done you have to pay a percentage of the value of your house as a deductible before you can get your roof. And so, something has to give. And so my feeling is, if we go in and we start talking about the value of erosion control, stormwater things, whatever it is, of these things as selling points, that then would have the business case to be able to, on a yearly basis. So when you renew your house insurance, they usually say, do you have a home alarm system that is monitored? If you do, we will take a certain amount off. And so that's where you can get it, where you're incentivizing it if we have these things. And so it's identifying these things that work. Alabama, maybe it's a stormwater retention tank. Different areas have different requirements. But as we've seen with California and Florida, California's had to adjust their building codes for earthquakes, and Florida has had to do that for hurricanes. I think now it needs to be part of that planning process, and it needs to be something that the general public is looking at and is appreciating. I always say that gluten-free was never mandated. It was something that people felt they needed, and so that's why the business community responded and they created those things. So it's one of those things that come with education. One of the things I tell our members is, we do a great job of talking to each other, but we have to start talking outside and having people understand the impact and why it's important, and why when infrastructure bills happen, different things, that it is important. And so they understand that impact, then they're more likely to support it.
Do you ever find yourself as the CEO of this organization who has so much information, the data, right? Hard facts about it's going to storm more, it's going to rain, it's going to snow more, it's going to impact erosion, which is going to have an impact on our communities financially. Do you ever find yourself frustrating that you have to come through the business case instead of the environmental case for some of these changes that are necessary? I would find myself getting a little frustrated if I was in your stance, being like, guys, the writing's on the wall, but if I need to make a business case for this to get you guys to understand and move in that direction, how do you deal with that?
Well, it's interesting. So I just was in another city where they were telling me all about things that they were doing. And they said, okay, so before the pandemic, we had this all approved and planned out and everything. And then we had to put it on hold. And so now, while it's approved, the price for that has more than doubled.
Yeah.
And not only is it the labor, not only is it the, supplies and everything else, but it's also the financing. And that's what really struck me. I don't know why I didn't think of it, but I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. So a 300 million or $1 billion project is now 700. And that's just a few years later in that process. So what then happens is any business, to stay afloat and do what they need to do, they're going to redline anything they don't have to do. And it isn't necessarily that they're bad people. It's that they are just trying to cut whatever does not have to happen. They're trying to go in. The mining industry does this. They go in and they're trying to extract all that they can for the lowest amount. And then, they usually leave it to civil engineers. And I, having worked with the mining association, I have a great appreciation for mining and mining engineering. But what happens is they then send it to the civil engineers, and it's kind of an afterthought because, it goes back to, we have shareholders, we have to do all these things. So it just becomes kind of the reason for it. And so usually people will react to the business case if money is involved and something that residually will happen. So every year you're going to see that your initial investment was worth it, beyond the fact that you didn't have to worry about the flooding and things like that. I think that will be the push. But a lot of it's education. And, a lot of it is on our side because, we have a thin budget and we do a lot of education and best practices and trying to move it forward. But we really have to get our message out. And that's why I appreciate you having me on here, because it is something that I think is has a huge impact just the society at large and around the world. So this isn't just, I love that we're an international association and that we're doing things outside. I was just recently in China where they had a slope stability conference, and they're doing some really incredible work, research on extreme cases of, slope issues, things like that. So there's a lot of information out there, and it's really bringing it to the people and having them understand that impact.
Since you became CEO of this organization, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned about this space that maybe you didn't expect before you took this role?
Interesting. So the reason that the recruiter reached out to me was because of the mining background I had, which was actually really well done from that perspective. And it's one of those things that I've always had a respect for erosion control and stormwater management, but you truly understand it when you see it and how much. And, you kind of said, it should be a no-brainer, but it's not. And that's why we have to get it out there. But it can have such an impact. And when there's kind of bickering over global warming and, straws and cows and all this stuff, I mean, part of what it is like erosion control and stormwater is going to help with that. The more that we focus on that, it really does have that benefit. And then you don't have to get in that fight of is it or isn't it. It basically goes to the science of these things are helpful, these things are detrimental. And I think that if we focused on that more, I think it get more impact.
What are some of the areas that you guys focus on that maybe people who are listening to this episode or watching this episode today had no idea that erosion control was really kind of putting their energy and their effort into? Is there any type of subject, any type of area of the country or the globe that you guys are really focused on at this point in time that we should know about?
Well, I'll tell you, I think what I found the most fascinating is when you look at downtown areas, you'll see it used to be there was just a lot of asphalt, cement, really no permeable pavers, nothing. And they've really gone in and they've ripped a lot of it out, and you'll see the trees. A lot of those trees underneath is actually a stormwater retention tank there. And so it's twofold, because you are able to have the trees for the aesthetic, but then you also have it where it is lowering the temperature, because when we talk about the temperature, sun on asphalt, sun on these roofs, asphalt roofs. You know what I mean? Like it's the thing that is increasing the heat. And so the more when you look at that, and so I love it because it gives you not only that erosion control and stormwater piece of it, but it's an aesthetic, and it's helping with bringing in more economic development as well. So these downtowns are really great. One of the things in Denver, 16th Street Mall, they tore it up, and then they realized, we're going to tear it up even more. And so it's been torn up for a while, but they went in and said, we have to redo everything. And so if we're going to do it, we're going to go and do it right. And so, it's when it's finished, it will be fantastic, but it's a lot of work. And, as we're again trying to cut costs where we can and everything, it's just on the front end is so much better than trying to do something on the other end. And the other end, I would say, would be like Michigan. Having grown up in Michigan, loved Lake Michigan. We used to go and these houses, we would drive along, and these houses would be like 3/4 of an acre to an acre away from the edge. And I would be like, why would you not have it closer? Why wouldn't you want to be right there so you can see it? Well, those houses now are falling over the edge because the erosion and everything that's basically hit those areas has made it so these houses are really being impacted. So it's one of those things that once it's happened, you can't. It's going to cost you so much more to try to mediate it than if you figure it out on the front end.
I mean, and that seems like a story that's happening everywhere. So not even on the coast of Lake Michigan. There's a guy who I was speaking to at my gym the other day who owns a house down in San Diego somewhere. And he was like, yeah, when I bought this house 10 years ago, we had our own little slice of a private beach, which was awesome. Now the entire beach is gone. My backyard is disintegrating, and I have to go down 1.5 miles to be able to access a beach. And first of all, I was like, first world problem, because you have some beachfront property. But second of all, this is a common story that we're seeing. The erosion of our coastlines is something that we're really going to have to pay attention to. Are there any type of like cities or states that have really started to take erosion control very seriously to be able to protect their coastlines that are a good place that we could look to? Or is everybody kind of just reacting and adopting to what's necessary as we kind of go through the future?
I think they are. I think, it's trying to find what's the most effective and aesthetic, to be honest. I just saw something about the mangroves and how much mangroves really help. And, I lived in Florida for a while, and I always saw like the jetty and the breakers and things like that. And I didn't realize just how important they were. It's interesting. I was talking to the president of the association, and I had read this article about Ireland, and in Dublin there were cars that basically old cars that they shoved off to the side, and they basically were being used for erosion control. Not the best choice for these old dead cars, but people have seen it and realize that there's an issue. It's again finding what they can use, what they can do when they're able to really tell the story of what's happening. I think they get more support. But for a lot of these, it's the city. I mean, some of it's, single family homes or whatever, where they're trying to figure it out. But municipalities are having to figure out how are we going to invest in some of this stuff and be able to cover it. And so, getting that funding, doing that stuff. So it goes back to really being able to tell the story of why it's important, and also the long-term impact and the savings on the other end, and kind of mitigation as well.
I mean, that long-term impact is something I'm really interested in, to see how leaders like yourself are going to be able to navigate the next 20, 30, 40 years of erosion, but also the environmental elements that we're dealing with as well are super impactful. I want to switch gears a little bit here and kind of play a different game, if you will, here on the podcast. So we've got Samantha, who's going to Western Michigan, right? And she's about to go out into the world and take on the opportunities to live in France and DC and all these different places. If you could sit down with her for 5 minutes and give her genuine, heartfelt advice on how she was going to navigate those years to bring her right here, what advice would you give that younger version of Samantha who's ready to go take on the world?
It's a great question. I think more than anything, there were so many times that I wasn't sure I was on the right track and questioned myself, or had, kind of depressive times where I wasn't sure what I was doing. When I came back from Japan and Ireland, or from all my travels and everything, and graduated, I actually had a paralyzed vocal cord for 2 years. And so I had to have throat surgery, and they said, "Oh, we still don't want to do it." I said, "Listen, I'm a language major. I have to do that. I have to be able to speak above a whisper." But I think that there were always times where I really questioned what I was doing, but it all worked out in the end. And that's what I always now tell people, is that, again, there's no one way of doing something, and it's going to be okay. And actually, all these weird random things that you did along the way are going to help you as well. And one of the things I always tell staff is, I'm not white knuckled in my job. I love my job, but I love it when my staff does great and I can celebrate them and they do well. They're never going to outshine me. I'm never worried about that. I'm always going to support them and develop them of what they want to do, but they never have to worry about me. I'm very confident in what my background is, and I want really smart people to work with, and I want them to do well and help us and move us forward. And I think that's something that I struggled with previously, is I would have people that I worked for that were always trying to kind of sabotage me or sideline me. I was always told, like, "You're never going to use that. You're never going to do that. Like, you just have to, put your nose down and do this and be done." And I paid my dues. And I think that's really important too, because you can't really appreciate it if you don't go through it. And there's something I saw recently that said, if you always knew what you wanted to do, that's kind of like a lifetime sentence, like a prison sentence, because you're never trying these other things. And so did you just go into it because you were so determined that that's what it was? I've had so many iterations and different ways that I've gone in my life, and it all led me here. And I'm very happy to be where I am.
Man, you just kind of gave us the perfect opportunity to segue into how we kind of land our plane here. So part of our tradition, Samantha, on the podcast is our previous guest wanted to ask you a blind question.
Okay.
Now, our previous guest is an amazing leader, a Stanford grad who also founded a company called Clayful Health, which is helping younger people get access to just-in-time coaching about all the stressful moments from when we're a teenager, which is really cool. Her question for you was, what is the importance of curiosity in your personal and professional life?
Oh, it's been everything for me, honestly, because when we go back to how I got into association management, I would be in a role, but yet I wanted to know about every other thing. And so it was never just about what my position was. It was about how it then other things impacted it, what it was. And so by the time I got to where I am now, I had done every single job. So I was not here to do the job, but I was here to coach because I could understand it. And it makes your life so much richer. And it shouldn't have to be somebody else forcing it. It should be you wanting it. And that's what I always, attitude and aptitude for me. I could teach you the topic, but it's attitude and aptitude. And so if you have the right attitude and aptitude, you can basically do anything you want to do.
Well, Samantha, that's a beautiful place for us to put a ribbon on today's episode. I can't thank you enough for everybody who's tuning in, watching, and listening. You are absolutely the definition of Hart and Hustle. And thank you so much for telling us about the amazing work that you do and having such a huge impact on not only our coastlines, our rivers, but our communities in general. We really appreciate all the work. Seriously, Samantha, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. We'll catch you in the next one.